What's up, beauties? Welcome back. Death of the Fingers. So I got asked a great question on Twitter. I couldn't resist. For a further explanation of this Rick Graham creative arpeggio lesson that he dropped yesterday or the day before, it's nuts. Watch the performance. You're just like, woohoo, whoa. Okay, a lot of work if you want to get up to that level, man. Wow. That's some no joke stuff. Killer. Absolutely beautiful playing. But here's the thing. I'm not going to show you the lesson, obviously. He explains it. He shows you how to go through it, right? So if you don't know how to understand or follow that lesson, you're not ready for that material, but you're missing the more important broad strokes here. And he says it in the video. I've said it many times. Never look at these music lessons as sort of like something to copycat. No. You take the musical idea and you're like, how does this apply to me and my playing style? So that's today's lesson. I'm going to take what he did and I'm going to basically adapt it over to what I would do, right? And then we'll just leave it at that. It's very simple. I'll step through the process, walk you through it each step, I guess. And we'll talk about the music theory and all the rest of that good stuff. And you'll see how to put the theory into practice and how to deconstruct a complex idea like that. Of course, I'm doing it for you in this case because it's Rick Graham. But you're supposed to be expected to be able to do this. If you really want to truly call yourself a musician, this is the equivalent of actually being like a tradesperson and qualified to do something. And that's one of these things, is be able to deconstruct one of these ideas and then reconstruct it in your own image, which is what you see all the great guys do. They're like, oh, I heard this crazy Coltrane lick or something else like that, or Randy Rhoads or Van Halen. They took it and they just threw it in their own pot of alchemy, guitar alchemy, and they stirred it around. They added some Eye of Newt and a bat wing or whatever else and all this good stuff. And then boom, they came up with their own lick and it became legendary. If you don't do that, you just sound like an amalgamation of guitarists. Plus you end up also having a very canned sound. Plus it's not fun. You need to earn your wings, if you will, so you can just jump off the cliff and fly, musically speaking. And so this is a great tool to help you sort of accrue the necessary skill set to be like, how do I sort of like factor in new ideas? I love Eric Johnson, but I can't play like him. Well, this is how you do it. Let's get into it. All right, beauties. Essentially, the first thing is, the first step, the first rule, if you will, is don't get sort of bogged down in the minutia. It doesn't really matter what key they're playing in. It just matters if you can sort of take the idea and apply it to a key that you feel comfortable in. Now, of course, we're going to do it in G major. Obviously, that's going to be the most popular one because of the whole E minor pentatonic stuff. Okay, that's its relative major. So that's why we're doing it in G major, because those two things are basically linked together. So the first thing is obviously, yes, choosing the parent key, which in this case is going to be G major, 3rd fret. And that tells me a lot of information. I know that it's going to be this step pattern. This is the first piece of information you need to understand. Okay? It's a whole step from the first note to get to the second note to create a major scale. Now, if this was a minor scale or the Dorian mode or Lydian, the step pattern would change. But as far as the major scale, I'm laying it down right now. This is it, right? It's a whole step between 1 and 2, whole step between 2 and 3, and 3 and 4 is a half step. Then it's whole, half. Okay, now that is incredibly important because it's going to make a difference when you understand that. Plus, it reveals each position on the neck vertically, which is going to be incredibly important later on for these like Rick Graham type licks, because he does inversions where you need to know that information. That simple low-level piece of information is what you need to use to be able to be like, okay, that's how I do the inversions. Done. Right? So it also sort of reveals a whole bunch of things. Think about this. If I just have this one note, I have the root, right? That's basically where I'm going to base everything off of, right? When I have 2 notes, I've got this. That gives me an interval, and I can run through them all. Here's the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, and the octave, right? That's all the big ones. That's really important information. The steps of a major scale, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, right? Or I should say the scale degrees. Then you have the sort of triads when I take every other note in the scale, 1, 3, and 5, right? That gives me major, doesn't it? What's that sound like? That's major. Minor, that one. Minor. this. I'm starting here with this one for the major, move to the next one, play minor, move to the next one, minor again. Oh. 4 is going to be major, 5 is going to be major, 6 is going to be minor, 7 is going to be diminished, of course. And of course, I'm back to the top again, the root, just an octave higher. So that's incredibly important information, obviously. Now listen, before you go any further, you have to basically be able to know how to do that stuff. If you can't, that's where it starts getting very not fun with music, because you just get completely lost and frustrated because you're like, I want to do this over here, but I don't know how to get there. You have to do this part first, right? Where you can just sit there and just sort of understand the relationship between each of the scales and whatnot and how they sound, right? Because if you can't, then everything else gets more and more difficult, because it's little subtle changes. And all of the basic information to decode his lick is hidden here in this initial stuff, like the intervals, these sixths, right? He's kind of going... right, which we will get into, of course. But you're starting to see the idea here. It's all based around this idea of the sixth interval. So if you're like, sixth intervals, what's that? Well, that's where you take the first note and then you move up to the sixth note. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's my first interval. That's going to be a major interval now, isn't it? If I want to get a minor interval, I have to take this major interval and I have to take this secondary note that's not the root, obviously, and I have to diminish it by a half step to get the minor. Right, so there's major, second degree is minor, third degree is minor, fourth major, five's major, 6. This one's going to be minor as well because there is no diminish as far as the sixth is concerned. Okay? And that's that. Notice it's the same pattern. It's the same notes. It's the same pattern of tonalities, major, minor, major, minor. This would normally be diminished, obviously, and then major again. But of course, when you're doing just the standard intervals, these are thirds, right? Look, major, minor, major, major, minor. For yourself, right? Like if you started to mess with them, you'd be like, okay, that's clearly wrong. And if you can't, that's a bit of an issue there too, right? And you could do the same thing, right? Whoops, I didn't make it there because the mic, but you get the idea. So you can do them with all of them, even the weird dissonant ones there, you know, like seconds. Ooh, that one's tricky. Okay, so I'm using the exact same methodology for all of them. Okay, so there it is. That's the basic stuff. You start with the key, whichever one you're sympathetic to. If it's A, it's up here at the 5th. It's B, 7, C, 8. Doesn't matter. Maybe you want to do it on this string here, the A string. It's going to be exactly the same pattern, although you're starting to get into some considerations there with the sort of the difference in sort of the G and the B string. Just saying. But it's all the same. It's the same. It's just because of the shift in the string interval when you tune them, because it's a third, not a fourth. That's why you end up running into a slightly different looking shape, but I guarantee you it is exactly the same. I could take this and layer it over top of this, and they're basically the same scale system. Okay, so that's where those notes come from. This major, 3 notes per string. And there's the pentatonic when I start subtracting some of those notes. But the skeleton here, that in-between note comes from Ionian, 3 notes per string. And there's the next one. And guess what? Shocker, it will always be this sequence. Doesn't matter if I move up here to Mixolydian. Now notice in this case, they're stacked on top of each other instead of displaced like they are up here. And that comes from, yes, Lydian. Okay, so that's why the theory part becomes important, because you're like, okay, start to see, you can decode it way faster. All right, no more chit chat. Let's look at his idea now. All right, beauties, let's further explore this arpeggio stuff and get into the inversions. Essentially, we've already established that when I'm starting on the first degree, I can take every other note in the scale and create an arpeggio. When I keep doing that process, I'm going to get a sequence of arpeggios: major, minor, minor, major, major, minor, diminished in this case, and major again. Okay, now yes, I just use the those basic, but you can see that, right? Then I've got I think you're starting to get the idea there. Each thing builds on top of each other, and you can then see it in the context as it is and be like, okay, look at that's a third. There's another third and another third and another third and another. So and when I move these notes around like this, a minor third here, right, to two whole steps, all of a sudden you get a totally different sound, right? So it's always good to sort of see those relationships, even though you're playing them one note at a time, right? Kind of situation. Well, if this is, let's scale back here. Well, of course, you can do them in 3 octaves, which is not bad, of course, but it should be used later on for other things, because honestly, that's not the friendliest technique to, and has nothing to do, obviously, with the Rick Graham stuff. In it as much as just knowing that there's these 3 roots here, right? This is going to be very important, obviously, when you're building chords, right? I have an E type on this one here. When I move to this one here, that's going to be a D type, right? That's going to be this one. Right? When it's on this string up here, that's also D type. Right? So again, putting those pieces together is going to be very helpful for you, because you'll be like, oh, there's that type of chord that he's basing it off. If you see this, eventually you'll come to see it as the arpeggio. Right? And this is just the notes of 3 notes per string, Ionian. There it is. Okay, so that's how that works. It's about putting the little pieces together and see them, like I said, in the context, thirds, incrementing, and then I'm just starting to add another notes. You can see it there, right? And you can be like, oh, look, there's a major second right there. And look, those will climb up in the exact same sequence, just out of phase, if you will, with the first one. When I'm doing 1 down here, this is going to be either 2, 3, or 6, right? And so on and so forth. Okay, so obviously it's 3 because this is the third. And what interval do we build off to third? Minors. And of course, that's what we got. A major interval and a minor interval stacked on top of each other. Okay? Okay, so now that we've got that sorted out, now essentially if I can do 1, 3, 5 like that, or 1, 3, 5, right? Of course, I'm just moving it now to the 2 notes on the E string. I can now jump up to this third and do 3, 5, 1. Those are the same notes, right? Why not 5, 1, 3? And that gets me back to 1, 3, 5 again. I'm doing the same thing with the scales, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1. Then it's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2. Gonna be 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3. That'd be 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 1. Then it'd be yes. The next one is gonna be the same combination of those notes. It's just moving it to the next iteration, which is gonna be 2 and 3, and then of course I'm gonna jump up to 5 and 6, and then 1. I can't play it and say it at the same time. Sorry, my brain is not that good, and I get way too deep into my cups over there. Okay, so negative. All right, so that's how that works. The same principles apply across the board to chords, scales. Doesn't matter if it's pentatonics or major scales or minor scales. The only ones it's not going to really pertain to is diminished and diminished stuff, because it has its own special set of rules. But that's just something you have to figure out on your own later on when you're better. Okay, don't get too overly concerned about diminished. It's not as badass as you think in terms of like, oh no, it's scary. It's awesome to use all the time, of course, yes. Diminished is an essential sound, but a lot of people are very intimidated by it. So, and it's because, again, The basic foundation stuff, not exactly strong enough to sort of be like, time to get into that territory where it's like there's no guide rails. You're just out in an ocean of music. You got to know where you're going. Okay, so I can take those arpeggios now and essentially start exploding them out across 6 strings, right? I got this, and I've got, and then, right? And that's based off the cage chord. There's that E. That whole sequence right there is right from the cage chord. I'm just rolling my fingers across it. And of course, stacking this one's going to give me from this C type here. Right, again, I'm just sort of tacking on this 5th here, the 5th 1, 1 through 5, right? Oh, sorry, that's the 1. Sorry, I know, don't. See, that's why I don't want to do these other things, right? When I get up here, this is that A type like that, and of course, it's also bridged with this G type, right? So that's where these... Okay, so that's this guy. That's where that one comes from, this A type. And then, of course, I'm building up. Now, listen, when I go way up here like this, that's the equivalent of this. Okay, when I bar like this, it's just this open G-type chord being played here at the 12th fret. And when I do it the other way, I have to basically turn my fingers around. It's brutal. And strike it from 15. That's 15, 14, and then 12 barred there. And if I kept going all the way across, I would get this big equivalent one, of course. But if we don't do that, there's also this A type here, right? When I turn that around, I get this C type. Right, of course, that gives me essentially moving down here, right? This is going to give me this one. And the open position G. There it is, done. So that's where the inversions come from. It's a lot easier to see it that way than it is to be like, listen, I take one, you can see it as 1, 3, 5, and then it's 3, 5, 1, right? And then again, 5, 1, 3. And then, of course, back to the root. That's the root inversion. Or this. And then you're moving up to the first inversion. And then again, you're moving up second inversion. And, of course, you move up one more time. And if you had 4 notes in the chord, you'd have 3 inversions, right? So you'd have the root and then 3 inversions afterwards, right? You've got this sort of situation. There's major 7 in the 3rd inversion, right? This is the root. Again, based off this shape here. Notice how I take these. This one's based off, in a way, but I'm not going to get into it. Okay, so that's that guy, and then you get up here. Up here. Oh, that's this one. This one's tricky. Oh, kind of give it a bit of a bluesy flavor there. I got to remember that one for later. So, stumbling around. Sometimes it works out, kind of. Anyways, you see what I'm saying? You have now 4 because there's 4 positions, 4 notes. 3 positions for 3 notes, right? Intervals only have 2 notes, so you essentially have 2 positions, but we call those cadences when you talk about chords or arpeggios, right? I can go from this 5 chord to the 1, right? So that would be this. Right? Oh my God, you learn now! Okay, you get the idea. Now listen, you can then kick it up a notch, of course, and get into the intervals. Let's talk about it briefly. Okay, and this is as far as I'm going to take this lesson because there's no point in taking it any farther. Most of you are never going to get even close enough to... I don't even know if I could do it. And you've already left the video by now if you're better than me. Okay, so fair enough. Good luck. And remember, I'm going to say this. Never copy somebody else. It just kills your own creativity. It's bad. Bad, bad, bad. Okay? Learn from them. Admire. Absorb. But do not copy. So the interval thing, like if I'm starting down here, of course, I want to start with this arpeggio. And I'm like, okay, look, it's a E-type chord. since I want to now do the intervals, makes sense to sort of think of it in terms of a chord, right? I'm going to use this fifth before going into the sixth. Now listen, I can move up here, but obviously this movement is a lot easier for me, right? There's the next one, right? That's going to come from this whole section. Right, there's the next one, there's the next one, and there's the next one, right? Again, these are all based around notes off this chord, this scale, and this one. Okay, so there it is. Again, I got a fifth, moving to B here, a sixth, that's a sixth spelled off D. Now this is a fifth, a power chord. But notice I'm playing it across two strings. It's like a sixth. Obviously, if that's a sixth, that's a minor sixth, major sixth, right? Minor seventh, major seventh, octave. See how that worked out? You can always math out your work just like I did there. Notice how I climbed up each step of the interval to be like, does this actually work out? And what is this interval? If you don't know and you don't recognize that sound, well, either figure out what the note is and stuff like that, but of course, try to, of course, zoom in on the sound. That's a very, obviously, very classic, and of course, that's what he's doing. That's not it. Right, that's essentially what he's doing. He's doing it up, of course. Not going to get into that, right? So now after you sort of start ascending, now I want to show you this here. Notice this is stable sound, destabilized, destabilized, stabilized, destabilized, destabilized, stabilized. Do you notice how I sort of use those stabilizing intervals to basically smooth out the transition? Because again, if you listen to it climbing up just diatonically, man, that's nothing to write home to mom about, right? So that's why it's important to use those stabilizing the fourths or the fifths in this case. Obviously, I'm just recycling this bad boy, aren't I? Wow, shocker! See that? It's the same interval and the same notes. Of course, this G5 here, that's G5, and that's G5, because that's the note G there, that's the note G there, and that's the note G there, and those are all the roots of each one of those intervals. That's the fifth, then it's this one, and that's the higher note, of course, and then and there's the higher note, nails it, okay? Again, breaking it down and being able to see these things in micromanaged chunks can be incredibly advantageous in terms of being like, internalize the theory. Don't just mindlessly be like, okay. Because if you're like, that's a fifth. There's something about doing that, even saying it out loud, that instantly forms a connection in your mind. It's like they've done studies when you read off a Kindle, one of these tablets or something, and you read an actual book. You retain the information way more, and you retain much more of it when you read it directly from a book. You barely retain anything when you read it from one of these Kindle things. Don't shoot the messenger. It's the same sort of idea, okay? I'm basically starting to call out these intervals. And then I want to move to the next shape, right? This is going to be this. And you can keep going. Now, in this case, I would use a different interval shape, and that's based off this minor inversion that's basically superimposed over the major and exist at the same spot. I know, don't get angry at me. It's not my fault. It's not. I didn't do it. So you're starting to get the idea, but if you can't get from what we just did, from the most basic elements, just being like, here's the sonic range I want to start in, and I know that that's note G, and then I know the notes of G major, and I know what that means. This is a whole step, half step, whole, so on and so on, so on forth. And then you're like, okay, here's my chords. You got that all sorted out. You're like, okay, I got the arpeggios. All right, third degree minor. Major for 4. Right, that's me basically moving through all of the chord shapes now. Wow, that diminished was sad. Diseased. It's like Old Yeller. The Old Yeller diminished. Anyways, okay, and then I just converted them into arpeggios, and then I was realizing, oh look, if I have this major, and I have this minor here at the 3rd degree, but I also have this first inversion. Okay, but I also have this 2nd inversion major now. And that's layered over top of the 5th degree. Okay, and okay, then we have a whole bunch of stuff going on there. Not going to get into it, okay, with respect to the other arpeggio shapes, but there it is. Okay, I can start to mix and match and layer them and do all kinds of stuff, but the first step is, of course, and I think he's probably doing like a sequence. And then he takes 2 of those types of chunks and puts them together. And then he just descends using your standard 6. But you're not ready for that, because then you need a whole nother skill set of basically doing a scale and an arpeggio into a sequence. Start with something that's actually doable by just sort of sitting there and moving through the arpeggio. When you get brave, you can then move to the next one. And in the meantime, you're like, okay, that's all part of this basic thing. That this next one, when I move it up here, right? Which one's that? Oh yeah, that would be Phrygian, right? Or this minor arpeggio. I also have this major, right? I've got diminished if I wanted. There's a million there, right? The pentatonic. And notice I can just start mixing and matching whichever one I want to. So down here, when I started, I'm like major. I might want to go with minor here, you know. Instead of the major, right? So that's going to be another tool that I can use. And that's how this gets important later on. The applying of the sort of 6th and stuff like that and all the different tools, it's totally up to you whether you want to do a sequence or whatever, you know, a series of sort of mini sweeps is another good one. But I mean, it's totally dependent on what your actual strengths are. That's why I would say don't get too invested. Instead, trying to be like, break down his idea. What does that mean? 2 inversions stacked on top of each other. And then we went through the whole process from basically no knowledge to 1 note, to building the intervals, to building the triads, to building the dominant 7ths. Right? Then we have the pentatonic scale, and then we have the major scale. Then we have the inversion, the arpeggios proper, I should say, and then we have the inversions. Right? And then, of course, we started to apply the intervals to these positions. Goes over this. I'm going to move up to this one here. Whoops. Right, I've got this. So on and so forth. And then, of course, as a side note, try to smooth out some of these intervals. You don't have, you can do the, see, look at, here's the 3rds, 4ths, 6ths, 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 9ths. Again, me doing the exact same thing, but basically moving through triads now. That's this one here, right? Based off this G. Starting here. 4th, 5th, 6th. Right? Are you feeling me? I know you are. So start off with those bad boys and then try to actually decode it. That is going to be way more important than just fixating, if you will, on one particular aspect. Instead, take that and let it inspire you, but at the same time, take the information and really run with it. Be like, what can I do? Be like, okay, this is the key he was playing in. And you might have to go full on bonus points. He might have been like, and you're like, oh, right? So when you swim with the big sharks, boy, don't be surprised if you get your leg bitten off there. Now, I'm pretty sure he does major, okay? I'm pretty sure he says he does 2 major 7. So obviously that's going to be the first degree. And that gives you a huge benefit in terms of figuring out from there. And then, of course, your idea will make a lot more sense. And when he explains it, you'll have a lot more to go off of. But if you can't do the stuff that we just talked about right now, then a lesson like that is going to be completely beyond you. But this is how you train yourself to get to that level. And you can do it within a year or 2. Just consistently work on it, call out the shapes, be methodical, always try to be musical, of course, and try to be inquisitive. Don't be afraid of a lesson like that and be like, how does that apply to me? And then try to take just a small part of it, a small piece of it, and internalize that. And then work up so that you can do something much bigger like what he does in the actual performance video, which is well worth a view. Check it out. It's totally badass. I'll include it in the description because it's like, wow. Okay? Got any questions? Drop them in the comments. Smash like right now. Subscribe if you want to. See you in the next one.